It has been a very long time since I have reviewed anything from Impact Wrestling here on this podcast. If anybody has listened to the show for any length of time, you know that I have gone in and out over the years. The longest stretch I went of really watching and reviewing Impact after having pretty much let it go for a number of years was back, I want to say in 2012. Believe it or not, it was around the time that Brooke Hogan made her Impact debut, although I assure you that's not the reason I started watching again. But there was a period where Impact got really good and was even a lot better than what was going on each week on WWE, and I was into it. And anyway, they changed the formula up and it turned to crap again, and I just sort of threw my hands up in the air, and every week it was different stories about mismanagement and people not getting paid and stupid decisions being made. And so Impact has gone through these cycles over the years, and now they seem to have found their groove. I've been hearing a lot of positive things about Impact and the regime of Don Callis and Scott D'Amore and how they've really tried to change the culture in this company. They've brought a lot of talent in. They have working relationships with different promotions in Mexico and Japan. There's a lot of Lucha Underground talent on this show. And so I heard a lot of positive feedback about Slammiversary, which is one of their biggest shows of the year, just took place this past week. And, you know, the thing with Impact is I would just always get exasperated with the product because they could have been a real alternative long time ago. And they were. At the very beginning, they were with the X Division when that whole thing was on fire and in its prime. They had the ability or the opportunity to be a real, true blue alternative and a successful one to WWE. But they just kept screwing it up, right? There were periods they wanted to be WWE light. But I watched Slammiversary this time. It was this past weekend in Toronto. And I watched the two main events that everybody was raving about. It was Pentagon Jr. against Sami Callihan, hair versus mask, and Austin Aries against Moose for the Impact World title. Anything with Pentagon has my attention. You guys know I'm a big fan of his work. So I watched the match, and it was every bit as wild as people said that it was. Apparently there were several hardcore type matches. I know Tommy Dreamer was in one as well. I think it was him and Eddie Edwards. So up and down the show, there were probably a good 2 or 3 different sort of hardcore type matches. I only watched this one, and I suspect that had I seen the others, this one maybe would have sort of worn thin on me by this point in the show. But since this was the only one I saw, I really enjoyed it. Because I can only stomach so much of that kind of thing. 1, maybe 2 matches of that is more than enough for me. So I watched the one, and like I said, it was very enjoyable. I'm not much a fan of watching Sami Callihan spitting and slobbering all over himself. I could do without that. But these two went to war. That's the best word I could use to describe this. This was a war. We had collateral damage with Pentagon being blinded. He grabbed the referee thinking that it was Sami Callihan. Of course, he couldn't tell because he was blinded. So he grabbed the referee, breaks the referee's arm. Pentagon gave him him being Callihan, a package pile driver on top of 4 chairs in the ring. And Callihan kicked out. It's one of those spots you watch, you're like, come on, how could this guy kick out of this? But he did. He kicked out. And then he broke Sami's arm, Pentagon did, and gave him another package pile driver for the win. I will say this, though. I think that match should have ended on that package pile driver spot on the 4 chairs. It did feel, he, quote, broke his arm after, but it felt a little ass backwards to me that he won in the middle of the ring with sort of a regular package pile driver, which I know that sounds completely ridiculous, a regular package pile driver. Even a regular one is devastating enough. But I did think it probably should have ended when he dumped him on his head on the chairs. But in any event, Pentagon wins. And then I see Phoenix come out. And I already knew that Cage was an Impact, Brian Cage. I knew Johnny Mundo or Johnny Impact, whatever they're calling him. I knew he was an Impact. But then I saw Phoenix, who I did not realize was an Impact, and I just thought to myself, when did Impact turn into Lucha Underground? And is that even a bad thing? I don't think it is. I think that's a good thing, because I like Lucha Underground. The only thing missing is Katrina. You get Katrina in Impact, I will review the show every week. But Callihan got his head shaved as per the stipulation. I enjoyed hearing Don Callis on commentary for this match. I enjoy his work in New Japan with Kevin Kelly. Josh Matthews, not so much. My opinion on him has not changed at all since the last time I heard him. I tolerated him throughout these two matches here. The other match was Austin Aries against Moose. Moose has really improved from the last time I saw him. Guy picked up this wrestling thing pretty damn well, considering he only debuted about 3 or 4 years ago. Has not been in this business very long. This was an excellent main event. Now, I was surprised that Moose did not win the championship. I watched that video package, and I will say this. That video package was tremendous that they put together for this main event before the match. So I watched it, and it was very well done, and it brought me all up to speed on the story and everything I've missed up to this point. And I thought to myself, well, this is certainly positioned in such a way that you would think Moose is going to walk away with the championship. Guy comes out, he's doing his Moose chant, he's over. So I was very surprised that he did not win the title here. And even though it seemed tailor-made for a title change, but, then Aries won clean. And look, I don't care either way. Austin Aries is a perfectly fine person to have as your world champion. I think he proved that here in this match. WWE never did take full advantage of what they had in him when they had him. Former New York Met, Curtis Granderson, who is now with the Toronto Blue Jays, was out there to present the championship belt. Granderson is a huge wrestling fan. Funny story about that. Granderson was a very big part of that New York Mets team that went to the World Series 3 years ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. You look at that Mets team now, they are a complete embarrassment to the sport. But he was a very big part of that team. And before they lost to the Kansas City Royals, I was going to try to get Curtis Granderson on the podcast. I knew he was a big wrestling fan. I remember him being in the crowd back at WrestleMania 23, so I knew for a very long time. I knew when the Mets signed him, I said, oh, he's a wrestling fan, so I knew this already. But this girl that I knew at the time, who I had worked with, was very friendly with him, and I guess the two of them had met a few years earlier, and she would always sort of mention him and name drop him, so I was aware that there was some sort of, relationship, friendship there, what have you. And I picked up on that, and it was funny because some of her friends thought that maybe I was, pursuing her. The truth is, I wasn't going after her. I was trying to get to Curtis. I was trying to find out how much pull she had with him in the off chance that he might be interested in coming on my show, and maybe as a favor to her. I don't know. Maybe he'd be like, yeah, sure, for you. I'll, whatever. I'll do anything. So, what a coup that would have been for me. My plan was, okay, Curtis Granderson is going to help the Mets win the World Series, and then I'm going to try to kind of put a favor in here, or put a request in, and try to get him on the podcast just to talk wrestling for a few minutes. That would have been huge. But then the Mets lost. What a surprise. And I never even bothered asking after that. So anyway, that's my Curtis Granderson story. Anyway, when Moose hit that giant spear in this match, I thought it was over. I knew it wasn't because I already knew the outcome, but this was set up nicely to be the finish. But Aries got his hand on the bottom rope. Aries hit a brain buster on the floor, tried to win by countout, but Moose got back into the ring just in time. Aries went to hit him with the belt. Granderson gets involved. He intervened and stopped him. Moose got a very dramatic near fall on a roll-up before Aries ultimately finished him off clean in the middle with a brain buster. So surprising finish. Doesn't take away from the fact that I thought this was a great main event. And I'm happy for Impact. I'm happy they seem to be finding their groove. They're hitting their stride. People are very positive for the most part, it seems, about the direction of the company of late. At least based on the feedback that I'm seeing. People actually seem to like working there, whereas before that wasn't always the case in terms of the people who work there, and they seem to be getting paid on time, which is more than I think can be said for the previous regime. And now Bound for Glory. They made the big announcement that Bound for Glory, their biggest show of the year, is coming to New York City, coming to the Melrose Ballroom in Queens, which is where MLW has been running some shows of late. In fact, MLW is running another show at that venue 2 days before my birthday, October 4th, and then 10 days later, Impact is bringing Bound for Glory. So apparently that building, I guess, is becoming a hotspot for wrestling here in New York. But good for Impact. Hopefully they can keep the momentum going. How much momentum do they really have right now? There's so much going on in wrestling. You keep hearing about the G1, right? The G1 is ongoing in New Japan. WWE, still the number one game in town. That's what everybody talks about. Good, bad, or indifferent, right? They've got a ton of things going on. They just seem to be adding more shows and more and more and more stuff. So between that, New Japan having their U.S. expansion, and now the G1 is going on, and this All-In show is coming up in September. Ring of Honor is having that big Madison Square Garden show, WrestleMania weekend next year. MLW seems to be sort of growing and doing very well. Impact, in a lot of ways, I don't want to say they're lost in all the noise, but they still seem to be only at a certain level. It just doesn't seem like they can rise sort of above that. But in the meantime, as they continue on, they seem to be in a really good spot right now. And that's where they need to be. They seem to have done a good job of shedding the stain of the TNA initials and leaving that in the past, which was a must. I mean, that was just an absolute must. Those 3 letters were just absolute poison. And even after they dumped the TNA initials, I feel like there was still a big stain on this company. And D'Amore and Callis seemingly have done a good job of sort of wiping that clean and almost starting from scratch. And hopefully they can continue to form more partnerships and they can build on that. And maybe at some point they'll actually, I don't know, move on to a network that's more widely available. Or I don't know what that next step is for them. Realistically, I don't know where they go from here. But just keep doing what they're doing because people seem to be enjoying it, which is more than I can say now for a lot of what we see in the WWE product.